Welcome to Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I'm Greg Bluestein here with Patricia Murphy. What's up, Patricia?
Hey, Greg.
So as we do every Monday, we're answering the questions you've sent us throughout the week, either by emailing us at politicallygeorgia@ajc.com or by calling at 770-810-5297. You guys overwhelmed our producer, Sheenie B, this week. He has a ton of questions to go through, so we're going to try to get through as many as we can. Sheenie B, who's up first?
All right, we'll just start with the top of this massive stack. Let's start with Kelly in Johns Creek, who says, I keep hearing early voting numbers are way up. Does that actually tell us anything meaningful, or is this one of those stats that gets overhyped every election cycle?
So, Patricia, I'm curious your thoughts on this. I was just with Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger at a campaign event, and he promoted that. He said every year we're setting new record-breaking turnout depending on the election, right? Midterm over midterm cycle. So, there's that sense that, yes, we're going to have higher turnout probably than the last midterm cycle in 2022 or in 2018. But also there is, every time you see these early voting numbers, you also have to say, okay, well, how much of it is cannibalizing the election day turnouts, right?
Yep.
How much of it is just people who would otherwise vote on May 19th who are voting early now? Certainly, though, we can all already see the enthusiasm.
We can definitely see the enthusiasm. Also, we have to have, parenthetically note that the population of Georgia has also gone up since the last election. So we just have more people here if they chose to vote, and they should. So there has been a 28% increase over the 2022 midterm primary elections at this point in the same election cycle. And so I think 28%, that's very meaningful. I think a lot of things factor into that. One of them most certainly is the fact that there are very heavily contested races on every level on both sides. So there's a big primary for the Democrats to run for governor, a big hotly contested primary for governors to run for governor. There's a big Senate primary for the Republicans as well. Lots of stuff up and down the ballot. So there's just a lot going on. There's a lot to vote on if you care to vote early. Something that I think is very interesting also is that there is a big overrepresentation of Democrats at this point. There are 105,000 Republican ballots and 131,000 Democratic ballots about a week into early voting. That's when the last time they released those numbers. That's a significantly larger share of Democrats. Republicans outnumbered Democrats the last time around in 2022. So it shows a bit of enthusiasm. And I think also there's that Democratic primary ballot that people can choose from to make their voices heard there. So it doesn't tell you everything. I consider it like one data point. If turnout were down 28%, I think we could reasonably say, like, where are all the voters? Yeah.
This isn't 2022, though, when Democrats really didn't have, at least on the top of the ticket, a real battle. You had Warnock, you had Abrams.
Exactly.
They just had a glide path to the nomination. Sheenie B, what else we got?
Next question is from Danny in Atlanta. Did anyone else catch Keisha Lance Bottoms not fully committing to serving 2 terms if she becomes governor? Should Democrats care about that, or is this just campaign season nitpicking?
I definitely caught that, Danny, and I'm glad you asked about that. That was a great interview from Doug Reardon at Atlanta News First. And he asked the former Atlanta mayor, because you did not serve more than one term as Atlanta mayor, can you commit to serving more than one term? Would you commit to 2 terms as Georgia governor? And the mayor said she would make the right decision for herself and her family and the state at that time. And I personally was very surprised by that answer, because I think that's one of the questions she's getting from voters, or the question I'm getting from voters is, well, do you think she would stick around for 2 terms? I think people were really bothered by the fact that she didn't run for re-election, and it was such a difficult, tumultuous single term. It kind of felt like she was walking away from the job. And so the question is, if you are elected governor, if people do trust you enough to put you in that position, can you commit to 8 years this time around if you were reelected? And she didn't do it. It's certainly that's something that she would have been prepared to answer. She certainly would have been briefed on how to answer it. So this was a very well thought out, carefully choreographed answer, and there was no commitment there. And that surprised me.
Sheenie B, what else we got?
Next, we go to Marietta and hear from Ari, who asks, how is Rick Jackson spending so much money in this governor's race? And at what point does all that TV spending stop helping and start annoying voters?
Great question. Are I start? Yeah, exactly. At what point do we get to the point of diminishing returns, I guess is another way to put that. How is he spending that much? Well, when you're worth $3 billion, this is something, Patricia, that we haven't really talked about too much, but the personal financial disclosure forms in Georgia only go up to $1 billion. Yes. So, or actually $999 million, the $999,999,999. So Rick Jackson's folks even kind of crossed that out and said $3 billion because he breaks the limit.
There are literally not enough spaces for Rick Jackson to record how rich he is on these statewide form. They're going to have to print a new one if he runs again.
So he's spent about $65 million plus on TV ads alone in this race. And that's not counting some of the outside groups and other things that he might be helping to fund as well. And that's certainly not counting streaming and personnel and mailers and all the other things.
The mailers are out of control.
Yeah. So he could very well be pushing $100 million already, which is kind of what he said getting in the race. I'm prepared to spend at least $50 million, but up to $100 million. He might blow well past that $100 million mark before this is over. Look, there's also people who see that as a huge benefit, voters who see that as a huge benefit. He's not out there hosting fundraisers because he doesn't need to. When I'm at campaign events with him, and I know you've seen the same thing, when he says, that he got to a point of his life when he kind of drew a line on his finances and said, everything beyond that I'm giving away. He said, that's God's money. I look around the room and see people nodding, applauding.
I don't think people have ever heard anyone say that before.
Yeah. So it resonates. But the flip side of that coin is, to his critics, it could look like he's trying to buy the governor's race. And certainly that money has helped him get into our consciousness, right? As someone who's never been a candidate before, he is neck and neck with Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones in the latest AJC poll. He's ahead of them in some other public polls we've seen, but looks like going to runoff where even more money will be spent.
Yes, and you can also think of all of that TV time as real estate, and strategically, Rick Jackson is able to buy up all the houses in the neighborhood, which means that nobody else running against him, Burt Jones has certainly placed TV ad reservations. It's very difficult at this point for people to even get on TV because Rick Jackson has bought all the TV time. Now, that is having a very strange downstream effect because Republicans in other races and Democrats in all the races say that they're having a really hard time breaking through with their own messages because they feel like Rick Jackson is so thoroughly dominating TV, mailboxes, door knockers. I have even had multiple calls to my home from Rick Jackson volunteers. I don't know if they're really volunteers, asking me would you take a poll for Rick Jackson? How do you feel about and of course I take the poll because I want to see what the questions are.
Do you have a home phone number?
I guess they're calling me. I guess I'm just standing at home when they call me. It's my cell phone. How'd you guys get my cell phone?
That's funny, yeah.
But anyway, so they are everywhere all the time. That means that nobody else can compete with that. And I think that is strategically a choice on the Jackson campaign. And I think it's been very effective for them so far.
Shani B., what's next?
Next is Brooke in Brookhaven, who asks, I have a friend who is a poll worker in Fulton County. Should she be worried about the federal grand jury subpoena?
I have a daughter named Brooke, and we should have just moved to Brookhaven because I like the alliteration.
She'd right? be the queen of Brookhaven.
Brooke and Brookhaven. Well, great question, Brooke and Brookhaven. Just a couple of days ago, this was kind of a bombshell because late at night there was a court filing that included the previously unknown fact that that there was a federal grand jury subpoena for all sorts of personal, detailed details about Fulton County election workers and volunteers. That raised the ire, to say the least, from Fulton County officials who made public that subpoena, that records request in their own court filing that was in one of the court dockets a couple days ago, basically trying to block the federal government from accessing this thing. This is too overbroad. This is punitive. The federal government does not need all this detailed information, addresses, that sort of information about dozens, hundreds of poll workers from the 2020 election. Another sign of how the 2020 election has not faded at all in the minds of many heading into the 2026 race. And how could it? Because it's still, you still have the main players from 2020 Brad Raffensperger, Chris Carr, Brian Kemp is backing Derek Dooley, right? Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, who is for a little bit was looked at as one of the criminal targets from Fulton County DA Fani Willis's election interference case, right? So it's still front and center.
Well, and also we have President Donald Trump continuing to say that the election was rigged against him, for which there's never been any proof, as well as the fact that his Department of Justice is pushing this conducting this investigation, pushing this investigation, the FBI raiding the Fulton County warehouse. I can see why a poll worker would not feel good about that. I mean, the people who are poll workers in Fulton County, I mean, to paint probably an overly broad generalization, a lot of it's just little old ladies, like really retired. Frequently, I guess there are poll workers, really just the sweetest, retired women. You can do it for a little bit of extra money, and it's something that they kind of feel like is their civic duty. They certainly did not sign up for it to be subpoenaed, and I think because of what all the threats against poll workers in the 2020 election, very serious death threats, I think that is what has poll workers unnerved. Republicans, on the other hand, are saying, what are you trying to hide? Where's the transparency? If somebody was involved, we should know who it was. And I think that puts those poll workers in a really difficult position.
I always see these poll workers as literally the cogs of our democracy. Yeah. They make it work. They are nonpartisan. They are just there to help people vote. They don't care who you vote for. They're just doing to me, one of the ultimate civic duties. Shani B, I think we have time for one more.
All right, let's do this one from William in Lithonia. I'm trying to understand this redistricting fight. If Brian Kemp already said Georgia isn't redrawing maps before this year's election, why are Republicans still publicly pushing for it?
Patricia, MAGA world is mad at Brian Kemp right now.
Yeah.
Early voting is already underway. The primary is May 19th. So Governor Kemp said what a lot of other Republicans are thinking, okay, I'm not going to cancel this election. Some other states might do it. This election's going forward, but maps need to be redrawn before 2028. So a lot of Republicans see that as reasonable. A lot of Democrats see that as ridiculous. But what's the wrinkle here is that MAGA Republicans, some of the Donald Trump's most fiercest allies, are saying, why can't Georgia do what Louisiana or Mississippi or Alabama or it looks like Tennessee is going to do, which is basically either halt the elections or just delay them or you name it and redraw the maps this year for 2026. We still could redraw the maps this year in Georgia. The General Assembly could still redraw the maps. It just wouldn't be till 2028.
When they would take effect. And I think there's also a significant legal question of whether it is legal to suspend an election, redraw the maps, and then ask voters to recast their votes and that change the results of the election. If there is a candidate who believed they would have done better under the previous maps, you can certainly expect a myriad of lawsuits to follow that decision. So I think rather than going down that road, the governor's made this decision. I do think that for many Republicans, we have multiple statewide Republicans or people who are statewide candidates on the Republican side calling for and pushing the governor to redraw these maps now. I think that is in many ways performative because the president wants it done. And he has put on social media, why won't the states suspend the elections and redraw the maps? We could hold on to the House that way. Buddy Carter is a great example. He has been on Newsmax very recently, last week, calling for the state to suspend the elections that are ongoing, as we have to say, and said that Republicans could pick up 2 to 3 seats in redistricting. I've never seen a suggestion other than from Buddy Carter that Republicans could get that many seats out of it. Certainly they would get at least one. But again, whether that's even legal, I think is the biggest question that Governor Kemp had going into it, let alone sort of like the practical effects of doing that.
Okay, let's take a quick break. When we come back, Georgia's judicial races, ongoing fighting over 2020, and why there are still so many undecided voters here in Georgia. This is Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Welcome back to Politically Georgia. Greg Bluestein here with Patricia Murphy. We are halfway through the giant pile of unanswered questions that came in through either our hotline or our email address, which of course is politicallygeorgia, all one word, at ajc.com. Or if you really want to get a speedy answer, patricia.murphy@ajc.com.
And I will forward that to greg.bluestein.
Let's get back to those listener questions right now.
Kidding.
All right. Natasha in Mableton, who are these voters that are still undecided this late in the game? We're already voting. Are they truly undecided or just not paying attention yet?
So, Patricia, this is fascinating to me because, we're not shocked to see high undecided in some of the down ticket races, but after $100 million plus spent on the Republican side of the governor's race alone, 1/3 of likely Republican voters in the AJC poll still undecided. 1/3 of likely Democratic voters in the AJC poll for governor's race are still undecided. And more than half of likely Republican voters in the Senate race between Mike Collins, Derek Tooley, Buddy Carter are undecided. That's a huge number. We don't have a great way to compare it to past elections, but I look back to the AJC poll right before the 2020 primary for the last midterm in Georgia, and only 15% of voters were undecided.
Wow.
So, it's at least, when it comes to the governor's race, at least double that proportion. It still seems rather high. I talked to Trey Hood, the UGA professor who crunched the numbers and did the poll for us, who said, just either folks aren't tuned in yet or they're genuinely undecided.
Well, I'm sure it's a little bit of both. I think there is a whole lot of news fatigue happening in America, happening in Georgia, and people are like, I don't know, I'll pay attention to it when I have to. I think also so many of these races are wide open for the first time in a long time. That has attracted dozens of candidates to these statewide races, and a lot of them are not well known. We know them certainly from the state capitol, but when you're talking about a state senator from Vidalia or a state senator who had been chair of the Atlanta School Board before that, some people are like, oh yeah, I think I know that name, but they don't know exactly who these candidates are. They don't know what they stand for. They don't know the difference between the candidates. And so from what I'm hearing from people anecdotally, they'll ask me questions about them. They're like, who is this? Who is that? What should I do? I'm like, I can't tell you what to do.
Love those questions. Like, who should I vote for? I'm like, guys, I can't.
My family definitely asks, some of my family asks me who they should vote for. But I think it's a lot of it is the sheer volume of candidates to process in this election. I think it's actually a very healthy sign for Georgia. It's such a contested state that all of these people who are very ambitious see this as their moment to strike. Mm-hmm. But it does put a lot of work on the voters. And I also think that people are starting to understand how incredibly important these local races are. And so they know that they need to kind of make some decisions down the ballot as well. I would encourage people to go to our AJC voter guide to find out more about all of these candidates.
Ding, 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 ding. I also like how you said that there are a lot of candidates who think it's their moment to strike, right? There's some candidates who are like up or out. They've been around, let's say, the legislature for a while and they're ready to move on. They're either up or they're going to just, take a couple terms off and leave office. There's also been this sort of undercurrent the last few cycles, to be honest, of Republicans saying, this might be our last chance to, preserve statewide office because the numbers just aren't trending our way. So a lot of Republicans out there, at least behind the scenes, are saying that this might be that their window is closing. And meanwhile, Democrats see their window opening. Mm-hmm. We have heard that narrative for a couple cycles now.
It hasn't quite turned out that way. Yeah. We'll see if it does.
Yeah. Shani B., what else we got?
All right, next is Ronnie in Atlanta. Why are Democrats suddenly investing so much energy into these judicial races? Most voters probably couldn't name a single judge on the ballot.
Patricia, this is we're going to be on May 19th. We're going to be closely following, of course, the marquee races. But I think the one I'll be watching even almost as closely are the two Georgia Supreme Court races, the two contested races. We've had all four of the candidates and the incumbents on this show, so you can go back and listen to all of them. Challengers Miracle Rankin, Jen Jordan, both are being wholeheartedly backed by state Democrats, and they're going up against incumbent justices Charlie Bethel and Sarah Warren. And these are nonpartisan races, and the final vote is May 19th. It doesn't go to November, so this is it. And it's really fascinating because, we've had, more liberal challengers going against more conservatives and kind of hint at their political leanings. But in this case, the state Democratic Party is all in for Rankin and Jordan. And you're seeing Republicans now respond. Governor Kemp's leadership pack is more forcefully even now backing the incumbents. You've got endorsements going back and forth. You've just got a lot out there on this race. And what we're hearing from Democrats is that in today's era of redistricting and all the changes that are going to benefit Republicans, because there's no way to say that Supreme Court ruling in Louisiana is not going to benefit the GOP. Of course it is. That they see the Georgia Supreme Court now as the last line of defense in all these judicial races. And so they're going to be more fiercely competing for these seats now.
Yes. And I think that Democrats are looking, as you said, just for any lever of power in this state that they can access. Flipping some of these House and Senate races is going to be a long way off. Winning statewide races is a big gamble, and you have to wait 8 years until you have your chance to really come back and try it again. And the judicial seats, which are voted on, of course, and so they're on a ballot, but they have traditionally always been nonpartisan. If you talk to lawyers about this situation right now, they are, the ones I've spoken with, are alarmed that it's become so partisan, so just nakedly partisan is the only thing you can call it, because the governor's doing fundraisers, the Democratic Party is doing yard signs, all kinds of investments for these two candidates who are not officially Democrats. But of course, Jen Jordan was a very well-known statewide Democratic candidate in the past, as well as being a state senator. So it is definitely trending in a direction that is highly, highly unorthodox for the way judges have been selected in the past. But Democrats will say, who do you think you're kidding? The governor appointed these candidates. The governor is supporting these candidates. Some of these candidates have worked in Republican administrations before. They are Republicans. Now, those judges will not say that. They don't say that. They say that they are serving on the bench in a very non-partisan way. But it is certainly it is the place that Democrats feel like they can make a difference, because so many of these laws that are coming out of the General Assembly are challenged by legal challenges. They often end up at the state Supreme Court, and those decisions are binding in the long term.
Yeah, and you can also see on the campaign trail the differences, because Jen Jordan, Miracle Rankin, they're having campaign events where they're kind of sort of highlighting their support for abortion rights. They are being much more vocal than we're used to in a judicial race about if not how they rule on specific cases, because they're not talking about specific cases, but they are talking about values and overall philosophies and things like that. Whereas the incumbents, and we had both of them on the show, Justice Warren kind of talked about how at parties, she's got to be the person kind of sitting in the corner, not engaging in talk about issues that could come before the court. So they're holding really fast to those judicial rules. And so you can see the difference in the campaigns from the sitting justices and the challengers, and that adds a new wrinkle. I think also, Patricia, there are Georgians who just do not want to see the state go the same way as Wisconsin and other states where tens of millions of dollars, that's not an understatement, tens of millions of dollars are being spent on their judicial races that are like basically partisan trench warfare. And there's a concern that Georgia and other states are going in that direction with a more political partisan race. And so you can see both sides of that coin, right? I understand why Democrats are doing what they're doing. I also understand why not just Republicans, but also this sort of bipartisan group of attorneys, who I've quoted in several of my stories, are really concerned about the direction this is going. Shani B., what else we got?
This question is from Danielle in Roswell. Republicans spent years criticizing early voting and absentee voting. So why are so many GOP candidates now begging people to vote early? What changed?
Yeah, didn't we see this really up close and personal in 2024, actually, where, Donald Trump railed against early voting for...
He still does.
He still does, and yet...
He voted early.
Also voted early.
Absentee.
Republicans would not even be able to compete in Georgia if not for early voting, right? Like, it used to just be a thing that favored Democrats, and now more and more Republicans are voting early.
Well, I think that any candidate sees that a vote in the bank is better than a vote not in the bank. So just their message to their voters, no matter what party they're in, go ahead, vote early, get it done. Don't take a chance that you're going to get the flu on Election Day Tuesday. So if you talk to any candidate who just wants to get elected. That's what they'll tell you. If you talk to others who know that President Trump is listening, you may get a different story. I think also there is some deeply held skepticism on the far right side of the Republican Party among activists that you can't trust early voting, you can't trust anything other than election day voting. Now that attitude and that opinion has gotten Republicans into trouble in the past when they've told voters, we don't trust the voting system, we don't trust the apparatus, and that's been a problem for them in the past. Most candidates will tell you to just go ahead and bank your vote.
Shani B, do we have time for one last one?
All right, let's do one last one. Angie in Snellville, who writes, why are we still talking about the 2020 election in 2026? It feels like Georgia keeps getting dragged back into the story.
Yeah, Angie, we touched on this before.
Ain't that the truth?
Yeah, we are definitely there. And one reason is because just the other day we had the Fulton County raid. The FBI raided Fulton County election offices looking for documents from the 2020 election. Of course, we have the aftermath of the Fulton County prosecution against Trump and his allies. Now the moot prosecution, but we're still seeing the aftermath of that play out in the Georgia legislature with efforts to sanction Fonnie Willis, efforts to kind of dive into the mechanics of that investigation. And frankly, we still have major players from that 2020 battle on the campaign stage. Some don't really want to talk about it, right? Secretary of State Raffensperger, I was at a campaign event with him just the other day. He doesn't bring it up, right? If he's asked about it, he'll answer it, but it is not front and center for his campaign. Whereas for Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, especially if he's talking to a really pro-Trump audience, he will remind them that, hey, the crosshairs were on him too, and hey, he was proud to serve as a Trump elector.
Absolutely. So, yeah, as you nailed it. The reason we're still talking about 2020, I think this state doesn't just have the scars from 2020. I think it has some of the open wounds still from 2020. And people who were involved in that are using their role in 2020 in many cases to prove their fidelity to the president. And the fact that the president is back in office and still continuing to push for investigations into 2020 and continuing to insist from the Oval Office that 2020 was rigged against him, including in Georgia, that keeps the story alive, and it really doesn't let anybody else move on from that until it's wrapped up.
Perfectly put. Well, that's going to do it for today's edition of Politically Georgia. If you've got a question about Georgia politics, a reminder, you can call our call-in hotline anytime. Hammer Shani B with these questions. 770-810-5297. Email us at politicallygeorgia@ajc.com. All one word. Of course, patricia.murphy@ajc.com.
And greg.bluestein@ajc.com.
Don't forget those dots. And we're going to answer that question right here on the show during our next Monday mailbag segment. It'll be right on the edge of the primary. So we're getting closer and closer. And if you enjoyed what you heard, please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform and share Politically Georgia with a friend. It really means a lot to us. We're going to talk to you next time on the Politically Georgia podcast from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Thanks for listening to the Politically Georgia podcast. Our executive producer is Shane Backler. AJC's head of audio is Sam Stamler. Production support from our partners at Goat Rodeo, including Kara Schillen, Hazel Hoffman, and Max Johnston. For more of our political coverage, visit ajc.com/politicallygeorgia, and we invite you to support local journalism by subscribing to the AJC. Join us again next time on the Politically Georgia podcast from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.